Hey Bearcats, it's Mirsayah Wasnuk, and I'm a student here at the Lindner College of Business, and I'm also the president of Net Impact UC Consulting. Welcome back to Sustainability in Business, a Bearcats Mean Business student series, a new series exploring key topics in sustainability and how you can apply them to your future career goals in business. Today, my guest is Braden Trauth.
Hello.
Braden, could you introduce yourself and what you do here at UC?
Yeah, I'm an assistant professor of industrial design, and I have spent about 25 years delving into sustainability from product design and that perspective and trying to understand what sustainability is, and eventually sort of explored a lot of different aspects of sustainability and eventually came back to product design after I had seen some successful endeavors within it, working with some former students and such. So.
Yeah. What is your definition of sustainability, and when did you find out that that was something that you wanted to explore and make your lifelong career?
So I actually started out in car design. That was sort of my big dream since I was 9 years old. And one of my professors here at UC started telling me about sustainable product design. And, just with my upbringing, which was also very religious, was, a big interest in trying to understand how to really have a larger impact. And, designing cars is great, but also as he started to explain to me about sustainability, I was like, oh, this is something that's not going away. As, humans become more successful on the planet, we're going to need to figure out how to really live with the planet. So, in terms of resources, in terms of population growth and all that. And so really started my journey when I was an undergrad here at here at UC at DAP, and went on my journey trying to understand it, working at places like the New England Aquarium up in Boston, designing exhibits to educate people about their impacts on the oceans when they go and make purchases at places like Home Depot. And so then eventually I found my way out to building fully sustainable off-grid homes, which really sort of brought it fully together. And then I found my way to permaculture, and that really brought everything together. It brought in aspects of energy theory and ecology. And once I understood those bigger pictures, I was like, oh, okay, this is sort of what we need to do and where we need to go. And so.
How did, getting experience in all those different areas of sustainability affect your worldview of it?
It really, we're all living organisms. We sort of spawned out of this earth, and we just have more capacity than a lot of other living organisms. And so once I started to understand sustainability, it really gave me a perspective of just looking at sort of this historical aspect of humans on Earth. And one of the, I think, most inspiring things about our time right now, and other cultures figured this out, but, and not all the cultures figured it out, was how to live on planet Earth and enhance it and make it better for all living beings. And, once I understood those elements, it was like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is where we need to go. And, understanding basically how nature has done it for 2 billion years successfully and has evolved and, suffered setbacks, when the dinosaurs went extinct. It eventually rebounded, and different organisms succeeded and other ones didn't, but and that's the way that nature tends to work. But then to bring it all the way down to our daily lives, is really the challenge. And that's what brought me back into academia years ago, was really trying to understand. I was actually working down in Haiti, way out in the mountains, working with peasant farmers, as these folks called themselves, and watching women wash clothes in the river. And at that point, I realized the value of a well-designed washing machine and what it lends in terms of the opportunity, not just ecologically, but also societally as well. And the fact that we can just throw our clothes into a washing machine, press a button, walk away, come back, throw it in the dryer, press a button, walk away, gives us all this free time to then go and do other things like science, medicine. And with that, it really helped me understand, number one, those advances of medicine. I mean, working out in the mountains of Haiti, I was working with a medical crew actually, and And one of the gentlemen came in and his hand was cut open. And it was one of those things where the doctors were like, you need to go to a hospital. And you realize the value of medicine, you realize the value of science, you realize the value of all these different aspects. But then also, things that we take for granted here. And so that's what brought me back, was realizing, like, well, if we could design a good washing machine that, and when the women were washing their clothes in the river, it was this beautiful mountain stream up in the mountains, fresh water. You can almost drink right out of the mountain. But once you started to wash your clothes in it, it polluted it for everyone else. So how do you design a washing machine that takes that water, filters it, brings it back in, makes it reusable again, and then also respects the limitations of materials, of energy on Earth. And so those are some of the bigger aspects. So
yeah, I kind of want to pull on a string a little bit from something you mentioned earlier. You said that you built almost like a tiny home that was completely off grid. Could you tell us a little bit more about what made you do that? I know that there's a lot of students here I've had conversations with that are super interested in possibly like creating those and selling those.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. So I found out about them at DAP, actually. And it turned out that this gentleman, he graduated from DAP in architecture in 1969, went out to New Mexico and started experimenting with sustainable building, which was popular then. We were dealing with an energy crunch through the 70s. And because of that, a lot of people were trying to find solutions. And he, living in Taos, New Mexico, it actually has the oldest continuously inhabited building in the Americas, which is the Taos Pueblo. And it's in contention with the Acoma Pueblo, another tribe further south. But people have lived in that building for almost 1,000 years. And the building has taken care of them. It's given them warmth in the winter, coolth in the summer. They have access to food and water. And so you could see where he pulled that inspiration. And the homes that he was working on, eventually he called them earth ships, and they were made of tires, cans, and bottles. So taking waste materials that no one wants or has much value, especially back in the 70s and 80s, and before recycling was even that significantly as big as it is now. But the homes captured the sun to heat the home. It captured coolth from the ground to cool the home, just like if you're in a basement on a hot summer day. It captures solar electric through solar panels, and then it harvests rainwater from the sky. And they only get 8 inches of rain a year out there. And they recycle that water 4 times. And he's come back to speak at DAP several times. They actually built one in the early 90s right next to DAP before they built the big edition, the Aronoff edition, which is the big pastel colored aspect of DAP. But he actually, was it last year or 2 years ago, Good Morning America broadcast their Earth Day show from the community that he built that I used to live in. And when I worked out there were a lot of DAP alums, a lot of architecture alums, and a lot of them owned their homes outright. They had almost no energy bills, almost no water bills, and they could grow food off their wastewater as well. And it's really impressive. I have friends who've built them, and especially dealing with the housing challenges that we're dealing with right now, it lends itself to an opportunity possibly to try to solve the challenges of it. And that's what Mike really was going for. And when I lived in mine, it was very comfortable. I owned it for 2 years. I learned a lot about sustainable building at that point and really laid a foundation for me understanding sort of bigger picture ideas of the possibility of sustainability. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Do you have any I would say advice for students here at Lindner College of Business on how they could think about, topics related to sustainability or topics related to design whenever they go into their careers? Like, you seem to have a very interesting perspective and a way of seeing things. Do you have any advice for them?
I mean, I think with the world that, as the world evolves, as we go out into the world and, graduate from school, my take is that you guys will have to deal with these challenges more and more, coming up with different ideas to deal with different problems. And that's what every generation has had to deal with at different times. That's what gave us all these advancements. And I think that, as long as you stay open, creative. I always say, too, look to nature, because nature has worked for 2 billion years. And we evolved from it. We eat food from it. We excrete things back to it. Our bodies decompose and go back to it. And how it's managed to pull that off, through, major extinction events, and, it still rebounds. And it's through that evolutionary process, which humans do have, every time we come up with new science and medicine and business ideas, those are all responding to the world of opportunities that exist around us. And through good creativity, we can understand how to come up with those solutions, really to solve people's problems and the planet's challenges too. And those two aspects, are really fundamental to sustainability, is always looking back to people and looking back to the earth as well, because we're a part of it. And if we understand those cyclical aspects of it, then we can really understand how to build sustainable businesses, how to build successful businesses that really fulfill people's needs. And to me, that's really just fundamental. And I think people who are able to do that will build the new economies in the future. And I watched the computer economy come about, and it shifted a lot of things. It shifted, really prior to that, the Midwest was, I've heard some DAP alums who have worked for big tech companies who are VPs of, tech companies that we use every day. And they're like, we were in Ohio was the Silicon Valley, of the 19th century, of the 20th century, sorry. And Silicon Valley sort of took a lot of that through computers. But, if we keep an open mind and creative, that we can really find those next opportunities and build out the next economy, which is exactly what happened with Silicon Valley over time. They saw opportunities, they dreamed up opportunities, they figured out how to execute it through science, research, problem solving, engineering, you name it. And over time it worked, So now we get to enjoy the benefits of technology, which can also help us with sustainability as well. So
I'm sure, in your experiences, you've had to convince people of, investment. Whatever teams you're working on, you might have had to be like, hey, we need to invest this amount of money, and we won't see return for maybe a long period of time. But the return that we'll receive at the end will outnumber anything that we spend now. And so do you have any advice for students trying to articulate ROI, in whatever teams they go into?
Yeah. ROI in general is what nature does. It takes a seed, it, falls in the ground, or maybe it's buried by a squirrel. Been watching squirrels bury them all fall. And you think about, I watch oak trees come up in the coming years. And it's really interesting to just watch those squirrels planting their great-great-grandkids' food, knowingly and unknowingly. They're planting for the fall. They're burying the food for themselves, and then they forget about it. And then what happens? You get more oak trees that produce lots more acorns, and that feed squirrels for generations to come. And that's the way that nature works, is ROI. Return on investment. And it wouldn't work without that. If it took more energy for the squirrel to plant that food source, if you will, it wouldn't survive. And that is fundamental to nature. And what really helped me understand sustainability was understanding a lot of energy theory. And there's something called energy return on energy invested. And once I understood that piece, it really helped me understand new opportunities. And, in the oil industry, in the oil era, if you've ever watched the movie or the TV show, The Beverly Hillbillies, there's a scene in the opening scene where Jed Clampett shoots the ground and oil starts bubbling up. They're down somewhere in Texas, and they make a ton of money because it's easy to get that oil out of the ground. Now oil's more challenging. And the oil industry started here in Ohio. It started with Standard Oil up in northern Ohio, and with the Rockefellers. And actually our daughter goes to school right up on Clifton Avenue, which I found out the gentleman who owned the estate before that school was built, he worked with Rockefeller, and he was in charge of Standard Oil in I believe, Kentucky. But they were the richest people in the world, the Rockefellers, and from that era. But that was because oil was very easy to get out of the ground, and it gave us a lot of resources. It gave us a lot of ability to produce a lot of things and power a lot of things, including airplanes, automobiles, factories, all that. And back then, when Jed Clampett had shot the ground, it would take about 1 gallon of gasoline to get 200 gallons of gasoline or oil out of the ground. That number has since dropped. The oil fields here in Ohio have mostly started to dry up. Fracked oil is still a big aspect of our economy, which came back in the last 15 years. But after that, the oil wells they do run dry. And so how do we take this wealth and invest it into our future and our children's future and our great-great-great-great-grandchildren's future? And there's a old Native American saying, and there's actually a wonderful company called Seventh Generation that Unilever, I believe, bought. And I believe Unilever's CEO is actually a UC Business College alum. And he, as far as I know, I think he turned them into a B corporation, which is a whole nother topic. But Seventh Generation gets its name from this Native American philosophy that you do stuff that you never do anything that would hurt the next 7 generations and how they would survive. And so that's, a really important philosophy. I was raised with very conservative values in my family, and out of those perspectives, I was able to, me and my brother had talked to my dad about these ideas, and, they have solar panels on their house, they have an electric car, because it just made financial sense. It made rational sense in the future. And so how do we take this great wealth and sort of invest it into the future? And that's the business opportunity that really exists all around in a free market system. So,
That was a great answer.
Man, I could talk more about EROEI. It's one of those things that when we built those homes, they would capture the sunlight. And the wonderful thing is the sun is free. It keeps shining every day. And so it would capture that sunlight and heat our homes through the winter. And it was colder than Cincinnati for sure. It was probably as cold as Michigan, where we were in New Mexico, which always surprises people because they think of hot deserts, but we were at 8,000 feet in the desert. And, it was free heating, which was wonderful. And then we also had the solar panels, so that was free electricity. Now, granted, we had to pay for the solar panels and the batteries and the inverter, but you prorate that out over so many years, and it maybe cost me $100 a year, I think, at that time to replace all those things, especially the disposable things. The solar panels lasted quite long, but your batteries would have to be replaced every 10 years, and you might need a new inverter or something like that. But through, again, going back to that example of like an oak tree, a little acorn is planted in the ground and produces tens of thousands of kilocalories, over its lifetime from that one little acorn. And once I understood energy theory, and there's a professor out of University of Florida, a gentleman named Howard T. Odom, who's written books about ecology and energy and trying to really get a full grasp of just energy and how it comes from nature and ecosystems, which it really helps you understand how to solve the problems. And through good design, through good business strategies, through recognizing those opportunities is really fundamental.
So why is business critical for fulfilling missions related to making the world a better place and making more sustainable design? How does business fit into that picture?
To me, business is the fundamental aspect that keeps the resources flowing. And, it helps us direct, it helps us fulfill our needs, it helps us, really scale up strategies and solutions. To me, business is arguably one of the biggest opportunities, because if you can prove that it's financially successful, and you do that through helping people, through fulfilling their needs, then you can really, and to me, this is where the biggest opportunity within sustainability lies. Now, sure, you have investments and research that do go into new technologies. So many things that we take for granted today were developed out by science researchers at universities, at government agencies. The internet is one of the biggest examples. It was a military asset. The interstate highway also was another one. But once that infrastructure is developed, it really greases the wheels of business opportunities. And if you look at how the interstate highway system, which was Eisenhower's vision, transitioned us away from railroads, which was a huge employer. My family worked in the railroad industry, my great ancestors, and it employed a lot of people. But as we transitioned to the highway system, the automobile industry started to employ more people. And you look at how large the automobile industry is and how it employs so many countless people that, and that's all through business. And out of that, we get better livelihoods, we get more comfortable livelihoods. Henry Ford realized that if he paid his workers a living wage, they could all buy his car, and therefore he could sell more cars and make more money. So there's something in ecosystems and permaculture design where basically it's understanding how each element creates niches. So an oak tree creates something called niches, and those niches could be shade underneath the oak tree. They could be food for squirrels. They could be, compost from the leaves. And I think what Henry Ford recognized is that businesses create ecosystems. And out of those ecosystems, you create more jobs, more opportunity, and more livelihoods for people. And, and within permaculture, there is this principle that sort of the niches are endless. And the opportunity to design agroforestry systems, for example, within those, you get all these different niches which create different opportunities for organisms to live. Those organisms, if you will, are business opportunities. They're converting resources and turning sunlight, water, minerals, nutrients into food sources, into fiber resources, into energy resources. And that's how nature has always worked. And I think the important thing is to realize is that we discovered this finite resource that's powered our economy for the last 250 years, about coal, oil, natural gas, amazing resource. How do we take that and move beyond it? Because we know that they do run out. And if, that's why Ohio was one of the world's largest oil producers 100 years ago, but is not anymore. It's since moved to Oklahoma and then Texas and the Middle East. And so, how do we take these resources and really build out our future and use them really judiciously? Because I wish the earth would make more of them, but it just doesn't. And so when the oil wells run dry, how do we set our great-great-great-great-grandchildren up for a better livelihood? And, taking these resources to build it out. And I always point back to Northern Ohio, where it all started. So, and actually the first oil well was drilled about 8 hours northeast of here in Northwest Pennsylvania, called Drake's Oil Well in 1859. So it's really interesting when you start to learn about energy and what it's done for us, which is amazing. I mean, I get blown away by what, we can fly halfway around the world in 15 hours now. We can talk to people halfway around the world. You go back 150, 250 years before this, and it would have taken you months sailing on a ship, and so how do we keep the progress moving? And that's the big question. And I think, when you lay everything out and lay everything on the table, sustainability inherently has huge opportunities to create that future. And so...
My thanks to Braden for joining me today on this last episode of Sustainability in Business, a Bearcats Mean Business student series. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who's ready to take the leap at Lindner. Your feedback helps more Bearcats discover the show. Keep showing the world how Bearcats mean business.